today, I hope that what we're going to share with you, you find enlightening. First, I'm going to begin by reading a quote, and then we'll read some material, and then we'll go into what I actually have and what I was able to put together via PowerPoint. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a proverb that I always use in all my presentations for the most part. And it says that it's a Benin proverb, and it says until the lion or lioness has his or her own storytellers, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. So in that vein, in that spirit is how I actually come. And I begin. The woman of today finds herself in the presence of responsibilities which ramify through the profoundest and most varied interests of her country and race. Not one of the issues of this plotting, toiling, sinning, repenting, falling, aspiring humanity can afford to shut her out or can deny the reality of her influence. No plan for renovating society, no scheme for purifying politics, no reform in church or in state, no moral, social, or economic question, no movement upward or downward in the human plane is lost on her. A man once said, when told his house was afire, "Go tell my wife I never meddle with household affairs." But no woman can possibly put herself or her sex outside any of the interests that affect humanity. All departments in the new era are to be hers, in the sense that her interests are in all and through all. And it is incumbent on her to keep intelligently and sympathetically in rapport with all the great movements of her time, that she may know on which side to throw the weight of her influence. She stands now at the gateway of this new era of American civilization. In her hands must be molded the strength, the wit, the statesmanship, the morality, all the psychic force, the social and economic intercourse of that era. To be alive at such an epoch is a privilege. To be a woman then is sublime. Anna Julia Cooper, A Voice for the South, 1892, page 143. Just a powerful, powerful beginning of what we're going to do today. Now, we've titled this A Life of Service, honoring Dr. Georgia Rebecca Dwel. And Dr. Georgia Dwel, who founded Atlanta's first successful private hospital for Negroes and practiced medicine here for 44 years, has been largely forgotten. She's basically been ignored in terms of no streets, no things named after her. So she's basically been ignored and forgotten. She was the daughter of former slaves, Reverend George Henry and Eliza Dwel of Augusta, Georgia, a native of Albany, Georgia. She attended Walker Baptist Institute in Augusta when the family relocated there. They moved from Albany, of course, to Augusta. Reverend Dwel was one of the first trustees of Morehouse and Spelman colleges. He was also the founder of the Missionary Baptist Convention of Georgia and pastor of the historic Springfield Baptist Church, from whence Morehouse came. From 1885 until retiring in 1912, Georgia Dwel graduated from Spelman Seminary, which ultimately became Spelman College, class of 1900, and from Meharry Medical College with honors in 1904. When she took her state boards, which of course is necessary for license, she made the highest score of the 102 people taking the test that year. She practiced for several years in Augusta and then returned to Atlanta in 1906. 1906, of course, we know the Atlanta race riots. A few years after coming to Atlanta, Dr. Dwel saw the need for the establishment of a clinic for children and women. Her prophetic slogan was preventive medicine. The Dwel Infirmary, founded in 1917 and incorporated in 1920, was located right down the street from here at 14 Boulevard Northeast. The institution and landmark stood there for nearly 3 decades. Dr. Dwel served as vice president of the National Medical Association for 2 years and as chairman of the Pediatrics Commission of the National Medical Association. She was very active in the Tuskegee Institute annual clinics and also organized the first baby clinic and Mothers Club for Negro women in Atlanta, which was an extension of the infirmary where mothers were given lectures and material pamphlets on prenatal and postnatal care. She ran it for 17 years without a single death because they were teaching preventive health care in the early months of pregnancy. This work, in addition to the other health areas she addressed, suggests how ahead of her time she really was and highlight the neglect of such voices in medicine and regarding Black healthcare issues. Her knowledge and activism in this area is richly reflected in the numerous articles she published in leading magazines and newspapers. And during this time, she was actually writing. The Atlanta Independent carried her Care of Children column for years. She actually did a book. Her book was titled Home and Personal Hygiene. It was published in 1939, and it was used in several public schools. She organized and set up the first all-Negro venereal disease clinic in Georgia. It was recognized as one of the state clinics for the treatment of venereal diseases in the early 1940s and operated in the former Herndon building, which of course, only remnants of that area by Butler Street is still there, on Auburn Avenue, directly across from what is now the Oddfellows, of course. She served for 5 years on the International Children's Fund Committee under the leadership of then Vice President, of course we all know her, I'm familiar with her, Mary McLeod Bethune. She also served on the American Social Hygiene Association and Children and Youth Commission of the United States. She organized the Roll 5 Medical Sorority, a medical reading club composed of physicians of the community. She served for 2 years as Grand Medical Examiner of Knights of Pythians of Georgia and 6 years as Grand Medical Examiner of Knights of Tabor. She, along with others, were instrumental in getting a colored women's restroom in Riches, which is, of course, at 5 Points. In 1918, Dr. Dwel was presented with an award for volunteer medical service by the Council of National Defense, which was approved by the President of the United States at that time. At the 1962 National Association of Colored Women's Club Convention, she received a plaque for her meritorious service in the field of medicine. Although that's not all. And I know I shared a lot so far, but that's not all. Her activism extended beyond the medical field into the community where she, like other outstanding Black women, her peers, shared her professional expertise and her concern for the advancement of the race, medically, economically, and socially. For example, for 27 years, Dr. Dwel was chairman of the board of trustees of Carrie Steele Pitts Home, which is still present and operating off of Fairburn in Atlanta today. She was a member of the board of management of the Phyllis Wheatley Young Women Christian Association, the YWCA. She was a school physician for the girls of Marsh Brown College, a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, a member of the executive board of Atlanta Urban League, the Child and Family Welfare Society. It's a lot, so bear with me. And the Atlanta branch of the NAACP. She was also active in religious affairs, having been a teacher at the Friendship Baptist Sunday School for several years. Yeah, the same friendship they're talking about moving, that was the one. She founded the Uplifter Club of Friendship. In her distinguished career, she served as a physician in Atlanta for over 50 years and delivered over 3,000 babies over the course of her career. Her retirement was at the age of 66 years young, but it was not the end for her and her work. She served on the Children's Adoption Commission of New York and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She even took the New York Real Estate Board examination and passed with a very high average at this age. Wow. The Dwel Infirmary closed on April 30th, 1949, but reemerged 2 years later as the Beaumont School of Vocational Nursing. And we'll talk a little bit about the nursing situation in Atlanta because she was very active in that. She donated her infirmary equipment to Marsh Brown College for the establishment of a student clinic, which was later named the Dwel Clinic. Dr. Dwel was married on 3 occasions. First, and this is where a lot of stuff is lost because a lot of people don't know she was married who her husband was because she kept her maiden name in a profession during a time when you had some women that actually did that from a professional level, but it wasn't common. I read a statement from one of the children of Dobbs, and she kind of said she was kind of sassy in the sense that she kept her maiden name, and most women, of course, were taking your husband's name. But Dr. Dwel was married on 3 occasions, first to Atlanta proprietary and professional tailor George M. Howard in 1907. This relationship ended in a divorce. She later wed Albert E. Johnson, retired pharmacist and distinguished Chicago citizen in 1942. And Johnson was the widow of Violet Neatley Anderson Johnson. She was the first black woman to graduate from any law school in Illinois. A lot of people don't know that they're connected. Matter of fact, Violet and Dr. Albert Johnson were the first to get married in a place called Idlewild. Idlewild is in Michigan. And many people who were upper class in Atlanta, many of them would go to Idlewild and they vacation, such as Walter White's family, such as Maynard Jackson's family. Many of those people went vacationing to Idlewild. And of course, we know the Outcast did a thing on Idlewild, but they didn't talk about that part of it. After he passed away, she later married James Alvin Rooks, a retired railroader with whom she would reside in Chicago until he died in 1963. I'll end this portion of reading about Dr. Dwel with these quotes from her. And she actually came to Spelman in March 1940 and spoke to an assembly of Spelman students who were giving honor to those who had achieved distinction in the field of medicine. And she said, within the past decade, women have been coming into their own in almost every profession. But there is no profession that I consider higher from a standpoint of service rendered to humanity than the practice of medicine, which offered an excellent opportunity to live the only worthwhile life, the life of service. The second quote, I am interested in all civic movements for the uplift of the human race. I had an inborn instinct for social work, but at that time, social work among our groups was not highly developed. And I found an outlet for my career in the practice of medicine, which profession offers an excellent opportunity to live the only worthwhile life, the life of service. She constantly kept reiterating, even when she spoke to the Chicago alumni, the aspect of service and the aspect of being able to give back. Thank you for being patient with me as I read that. I'm nervous as all get out, but thank you for being patient. Now we're gonna go right into the PowerPoint as it relates to what I was able to put together and what I was able to find. Is everyone okay? All right, y'all are very attentive, that's good. And this is one of the really, really beautiful pictures of her in her young age. There is no bad picture of her. Now, Reverend George Henry Dwel, as I mentioned, he was one of the first on the board of trustees for Morehouse and Spelman. He actually ends up being the pastor of that church. And he actually purchased the freedom of him and his mother. He actually purchased their freedom, and that's how they're able to actually get free. Now, unfortunately, you can't see a real good picture of, that's Thomas Henry Dwel. And he was very, very prominent. She had 4 brothers. She was the only girl, so of course, that was daddy's girl, and you'll find out later on why that relationship existed so strong. But 3 of them became pastors, and one of them, this is the only one who I've been able to find descendants today, is George Bagwell Dwel. And one of his descendants is actually an attorney in Michigan, Jackson, Michigan. This is actually, did I do something wrong? No. Okay. This is actually a school in Augusta, the Institute, Walker Institute, Baptist Institute, where all of the children actually attended. And this, of course, is Spelman. And if you don't know, Spelman was actually very, very prominent in the sense of nurses. And McVicker Hospital, which is now, I believe it is I don't know if it's a dorm or it's a dorm. It's a dorm. Yes, it was a hospital. And many of the prominent Dr. Dwel, Dr. Butler, they were all working and helping at that hospital. It was a very, very good hospital based on my research. Meharry, of course, is the medical college that she actually went to. And I do apologize for not having the sister's name who was in school with her, but she's recognized in North Carolina. But it was a sister that was in school with her who became a doctor as well and was prominent in the South as well. Now, this is very important because the National Medical Association, as you know, you had the discrimination going on. They could not be a part of the American Medical Association, so they had to start their own. The reason why I put this slide together is because when Booker T. Washington came in 1895 and spoke at the park, Piedmont Park, and the exposition took place, during the time that took place, there was a meeting at First Congregational Church, which is only 2 blocks over. And that's where they had already begun moving toward having the dentists, the medical doctors organized, but that's when they really began to take off in terms of being organized in a fashion to really be effective for the African American community that was being left out. In 1916, once she got the divorce that I mentioned earlier, she purchased property, and her neighbor is Dr. Butler. And the Butlers and the Dwel family is very close. And when you go through a lot of I was fortunate to be able to go through some papers and kind of see how they actually were befriended each other. Because Dr. Butler was on some of the same things that she was. And you're talking about 1923, she's the vice president of this organization, which is predominantly African American males. So she was very active, very, very active. Now, the reason why I have this up is because Dr. Dwel had a really good, strong relationship with her father. When her mother passed in 1891, her father remarried, and he remarried into the Watts family. And when he remarried, the young man who was his son-in-law, he actually sends him to school. He goes to Lincoln University, but Dr. Dwel honored her mother-in-law, stepmother, excuse me, and here in Atlanta. And this is like the beginning of all of these. The Dwel family home was known for all of these great monumentous occasions where people were recognized. And in this one, some of the women who actually came and recognized Reverend George's wife is listed there. But it was like, it's like the first one I found that was in the local newspaper, the Atlanta Constitution reported this. So it was kind of amazing that they're reporting these kind of things that were going on. Now, George Howard was a prominent tailor in Atlanta, and of course they got married according to the census in 1907. And George had a son, and his son goes on into the tailor business, and he's operating tailoring up into the 1940s here in Atlanta. So the Howard family was prominent as well. And they actually lived 450 Auburn Avenue, which it wasn't a King Center there, it wasn't a barrier there, so it was right across from Ebenezer Baptist Church. So that's where their home was. And their neighbor was a prominent member of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, who is Dr. Lucius Holsley. So I know a lot of people may know about the Holsley Institute, that kind of thing, but he was the neighbor. And we'll just go past this, because this is just when she honored her father. And it's a who's who. Who's there? I mean, Professor Brawley, Hope, Fountain, Dr. Reverend Crawford, E.P. Johnson, school named after him, P.J. Bryant, his wife doesn't get a lot of respect in terms of the history either. She actually ran a school here in Atlanta off of Auburn Avenue, and Dr. Slater. So they had a who's who was actually at this occasion, because Dr. Dwel was, he was prominent. He set up most of the huge churches in Atlanta during that time. He was the man. Now, once Dr. Reverend Dwel's wife passes, he ends up coming to Atlanta. So he's no longer in Augusta, and he moves to Atlanta. And when he moves to Atlanta, of course, he's 87 in 1920, and he lives here in Atlanta up into the 90s. He dies in 1928. So he's right here in Atlanta, and he's still active at Big Bethel. He's somewhere everywhere, very, very active. And their neighbors, of course, is still the Butlers. And she had a great relationship, working relationship with Selena Sloan Butler, because she did a lot for the neighborhood union. And I'm just going to read something from this. And she did a full-page article on why women should vote. And don't remember the year. I think this is 25, I think. But obviously, Benjamin Davis really respected and appreciated her, because her articles were in there, and she had the ability to be able to put her writings in the paper. And I'll just go a couple paragraphs. Throughout the centuries, people have been struggling for religious and political liberty, for the right to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience, and to determine for themselves the kind of laws that shall bind them. As culture has progressed, the desire for self-government has increased, and the status of woman has climbed to higher and higher levels. Today we are blessed with the rights and privileges for which mankind has so long and ardently driven. Yet through our failure to exercise these rights, we are permitting indifference to rob us of the benefits to which we are entitled. Women should inform themselves on the questions at issue, and as such, we should be able to express our will in the ballot, at the polls. For if we remain silent on subjects so vital to every loyal citizen, we would be as remiss in our duties as if we failed to perform any other task imposed upon us. And she goes on and she talks about, this is a really good article where she deals with, encouraging women to vote. Of course, not only was racism permanent throughout the African American community and throughout America, but sexism was too. So she addressed that even in that article. And we'll go here. This is just the Atlanta Constitution, the Atlanta Independent. Most of the newspapers carried the fact that when he died, he actually died at their home. And he was actually buried in front. I believe that's what the historian at the church said, in the front where all the pastors from Springfield are buried. And as you can see here, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure I put the 1930 was in there was because it wasn't just an infirmary where she just had a complete hospital. She actually had rooms that were rented to individuals who were involved in the medical field as well, which is very, 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 very good in terms of what she was all about. And this is one of those articles, Care of Children, that was featured in the Atlanta Independent. Now, one of the reasons why I put Ms. Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin on here and the National Association of Colored Women Clubs is because in 1939, under Dr. Dwel, who was a member, she organized, and this was in the New York Times, they reported on her leading a huge procession of women to the gravesite of Miss Ruffin, who she really, really admired as one of the preeminent women leaders during that time. And this one is very important, especially for Spelman because, and Morris Brown too, because Leona Edwards is a graduate of Spelman's nursing program. She ends up leaving Spelman and working for Dr. Dwel. When Dr. Dwel ends up closing the infirmary and donates the equipment to Morris Brown, guess who goes and runs the clinic at Morris Brown? None other than Leona Edwards. Not only that, she's doing like two tasks at the same time because she's running that and she ends up going back to the location and teaching at Beaumont School of Vocational Nursing. So these phenomenal women who are doing great, great service to the community is just amazing. I know you see the Spratling. Spratling had a dry cleaning business and they lived in the same neighborhood. Some of the cards and letters that were sent to the butlers were sent from the Spratling. So I know that, of course, Dr. Dwel was just one house down from them as well. But 1940, and I just want to kind of help you understand economics. 1940, her home was valued at $6,500. It was $5,000 the year before that. That just kind of helps you understand the kind of wealth that she was able to obtain. And this is one of those cards that Dr. Dwel sent. It was like common during, and I think they still do it. I know Mother King used to do it. It's common for them to send cards during that time of the year. And this is one that Dr. Dwel signed and sent to the Butler family. And we pulled this out of the Auburn Avenue Research Library archives. So we thank them for having that available to us. And this is the advertisement of her marriage to Dr. Albert Johnson. And this is like full in Chicago newspaper, in Atlanta newspaper. It was like a big occasion. Her brother wrote a full, huge ad, a huge article that was actually in the archives at Spelman. And it's just amazing that they were recognized during this time. And this is another picture of her I was able to obtain through the book that was done by Mason, Skip Mason. And as you can see, the hospital, now, from a technical standpoint, if you're going to go by state records, she wasn't operating the Dwel Infirmary in 1906. But from a standpoint of her pulling up her sleeves and being in the communities, which you had during those times. You had, of course, this community, you had Summer Hill, and you also had an area which is now, of course, the Georgia Dome, but the Lightning area was an area where she put a lot of time. Beaver Slide, which is where Hope Homes ends up being developed later on. But she was very active in those, what they call ghettos or slums. She was very active in those areas. So I still recognize 1906. Maybe they don't because it's not recognized by the state, but she was actually working. And these are some of the same things that I mentioned earlier in terms of her service. And this, of course, concludes it with a picture of the class of 1959. And just to show you, Gloria Johnson, RN teacher, Spelman graduate as well. But some of these students, Mary Summerall comes out of Kennesaw during this time. So you have people that were coming from all over going to the vocational training. Now, I know y'all want to give me a round of applause, all that hard work, but now I just see you. But,
one of the questions,
yes.
Can you go back to the previous slide just for one moment?
Yes.
It's an observation, please. Thank you so much.
Okay. Let me go back. Trying to get that up. But at any rate, one of the things that is unique in the sense of the African American experience is that Spelman School of nursing program was top notch. The lady name is Miss Andrews. I think her name was Lucia, something like that, Andrews. But I have a picture of her. But she ends up going, she graduates from Spelman. She goes to Grady Hospital. She establishes she established a colored division dealing with black nurses. You have to remember, during that time, black women were being ostracized. They couldn't go to white schools for nursing, and if they received training, they couldn't get the certification. So they was going through a lot of hoops in order to try to practice this profession where black people actually needed the service in the community. So she goes to Grady, and she's instrumental in getting that program up. It was a two-edged sword, because once she got Grady up and established, you know what happens. That's the end of Spelman's nursing program. As Grady's improved, Spelman's discontinued. Now, of course, McVicker Hospital begins to suffer as well. And the reason why it begins to suffer is because of the mere fact that now some semblance of African Americans are being able to gain the career, make the advantage, but now they're being able to use in pockets where they couldn't be utilized before. It was a tremendous amount of oppression in terms of women going through education, because some families needed their families to work, not necessarily focus on women going to school as much as they probably should have. But, and I say that to say that the success of them opening up the door, there's no way to avoid the aspect that it hurt Spelman in terms of them being able to keep the nursing program going, because it's a reality. There's a tremendous shortage of nurses today. Spelman, Morris Brown, and it was another school that it was Spelman, Morris Brown, the Grady School, and it was like four of them. But the majority of African American women went to those schools to get the training. And when those African American institutions programs were eradicated, then Grady had total control to determine who, what, where, when, and why. And that's why Beaumont comes into play. And it's very important because it lasts for quite a while in terms of operating until, of course, Morris Brown gets afloat with their program and pushing for nurses. But they were very, very actively involved in trying to make sure that African American women were getting an opportunity to move forward. I see some questions. So, anyone have any questions?
Well, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my name is Barbara Bell.
Yes.
I am the director of the Health Risk Program at Spelman
Yes,
College.
ma'am.
and this is my 21st year as the director of the Health Careers Program. Our Health Careers Program is named in honor of Dr. Georgia Dwel. And actually, every year in October, we always have a large Georgia Dwel program where we invite local health professionals. And this is Mrs. Ajobor. She is the coordinator. We actually just flew in from Memphis, but we knew this was happening. We came straight from the airport. So one of my first questions is, and you mentioned that there was no street named after her. We can work on that.
Yes.
I would love for that to happen,
Yes.
because she was really very, very instrumental,
Yes.
and very important to us and students who have come through Spelman as of late, but especially just in the Health Careers Program. Let's show him that. Everybody has to read this. This is about Georgia Dwel, and it's some of the information you have, but we need to get with you because you have a lot of more information, and
Yes,
we
ma'am.
continue to give this to our students because this is very, very important, and you wouldn't think it could have been done.
Right.
But
Right.
it was done,
Right.
and I'm not a Spelman woman, but it took a Spelman woman to do it. I
Right.
feel like I finished growing
Oh,
up
you
in
there too?
Spelman.
Yeah, you spell.
And it is just fantastic, and a lot of the information you were given, we just hadn't gotten our hands on that information.
Yes.
We actually even have her high school graduation picture.
Wow.
In 2001, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Health Careers Program.
Yes.
So at school, we started from the beginning and all the way, and emphasized Georgia Dwel throughout there. So this was truly, truly wonderful.
Thank you.
And we definitely were going to be here. We were trying to get some of our students to come, but between studying for tests to become Georgia Dwellies
Yes.
and things like that,
Yes.
they just, they were in classes, they just
Right.
weren't able to make it. But we will certainly bring this information back. But, and we will continue to keep in touch with you because we've been attentive, but we've been writing notes, and we need to get to make a better brochure. I said, we need to work with them to help to get a street name, and we will do that because everything you said, we're familiar with much of it. We knew Spelman started as a nursing school and infirmary, and we have there's more interest in nursing now because once that happened, a lot of the students were going into medicine and dentistry and other areas. But there's still women out there and young women who are interested in nursing. So of recent years, probably about 6 years, we've been holding nursing roundtables.
Wow.
And to give information to our students who are interested in nursing. This past Georgia Dwel reception, I was not there, but we had a lady, Miss Beeman, who, Blackburn Beeman, so was Beeman brought down here, or her mother?
Her mother was brought down from Alabama to give birth, and Dr. Dwel is the one that actually
And she
delivered
drove
her.
down to make sure that the baby was delivered by Dr. Dwel. So
Wow.
there's a lot of that
Yes.
on Spelman's campus, and we need to, especially in the Health Careers Program, but we need to spread it across the campus.
Right.
And we certainly want to get with you so we can get more of this information.
Absolutely.
I think we asked you to come over to Spelman.
Yes.
Okay,
She said
because I was
email.
gonna do it again and again and again, but.
Ms. Bell, is there, the health center that you're over, is that, you said the program's name you do every year, but is there a building or something on the actual Spelman campus
No,
that
that-
is named for her?
No,
or-
there's not a building,
Or
but for
something.
instance, our program,
Okay.
the Health Careers Program is named in her honor, and there's also a big plaque that's been there for a while. And every year, we give an award at the senior reception, it's the Georgia Dwel Award. And it's given to a student throughout the 4 years who we have noticed have been like Georgia Dwel, persevering,
Yes.
a leader, making a difference, service. And it's the highest award that we give in our program. And we do that every year, and it's actually coming up. So this has really been great. We highlight women's history and Black history, and last year something happened this year, but it's not gonna happen again. We're gonna do women's history tomorrow. But I've always been fascinated by her when I first started hearing about her. And there's a lot of connections. I came to Spelman and I was teaching full-time, then I ended up going into health careers, so I found out a lot about that. Then we started the nursing program. I also taught at Morris Brown for a year, and I taught anatomy and physiology to the nursing students when they did continue with their nursing programs. So we all have connections as long as we're on this earth. But this is just, it's a good feeling for me and a spiritual feeling, and I'm just so happy about it, and it's gonna continue to go on, so I do appreciate that.
Thank you for coming, thank you so much. And I will say that the other award is in Chicago. In Chicago, they issue out a scholarship in her honor to students that actually end up going to Spelman. And I think they do it every year. I think it's 1,000 or 1,500 or something like that.
What program
She was
is that
very
from?
active. I don't know.
We have to find that
But
out.
I'll forward you
You did
what
a
I
lot
have.
of work,
Right,
and
yes.
thank you for sharing, but
Thank you.
look, we have a lot more work to do with
Yes.
you, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what facility is over there now where she had started the Dwel Infantry?
Oh, it's 14 Boulevard.
Right.
14 Boulevard. There's a house that's sitting right on where that property was. You can of course see and know that it's not from back in the 20s. But there's a house there that's open space. It's a lot of open space right there on Boulevard.
Oh, okay, so it's a house over there now?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so was she?
The house is not on the entire property, it's on a portion of the property.
Okay, so, what happened to it, because I had missed part of it.
Okay, you missed part of it, that's
Yeah.
okay. The infirmary operated up until